Amazon keep hurting players who haven't No Life New World, and I think it's going to hurt the game if it hasn't already. Basically, as Amazon is fixing things that shouldn't have been in the game in the first place, what it's actually doing is hurting players who never got to gain an advantage by using them when it was available. Let's go through some examples. Now, I first noticed this with the boars in Restless Shore. Basically, lots of boars were spawning very, very quickly, and you could use them to level up your skinning, to level up your weapon mastery, and even gain some levels doing so. Sure, it absolutely needed to be fixed, but that fix came a little bit too slow. It was several weeks after the game launched before it was actually addressed. And basically, anybody who was ahead in levels managed to gain advantage from that because there wasn't any punishment, because it was just a game feature. So when it was fixed, you're actually just hurting the players who are coming after those players because they no longer get the advantage from it. I guess you could argue that you're making the game better and they should enjoy it more, but that's not necessarily the feeling I think most people felt. And it's going to be two core problems that keep repeating here, and that is this shouldn't have been in the game in the first place, and then when they tried to fix it, they did it too slow. Now, the boar patch on its own would not have been enough to make this kind of video, but in the latest patch 1.1, they do two things that essentially does the same thing. That's hurting players who are a little bit behind, are coming after the people who are already max level and have used these. And the first one is crafting. So crafting is a little bit hard to explain. Essentially, the total number of XP for several professions has gone up, but also the XP that you get when crafting has gone up for the higher tier stuff. The game is trying to get you to make the highest tier thing that you can craft rather than making like 1 billion linen gloves. Unfortunately, what actually is the case is that the total number of XP and the amount of XP you get extra isn't aligned, and it is actually more difficult to level up now, so that it's going to take more resources and more time to get to level 200. Now really, the change that stops you making 1 billion linen gloves to get from like level 0 to level 200 is actually a good change. Like, it's a positive idea, good concept. But making getting to level 200 now is actually just awkward, not just for the casual players, it's awkward for people who wanted to maximize all of their trade skills, but really those casual players who don't have anything at 200 right now, they can see the people who already do, and they envy them because they got there in an easier way than what they now have to do. They've made the game harder for the casual player base, and that's just going to leave the casual players feeling frustrated. And it's the same two exact problems. Why was this in the game in the first place? Why didn't they notice this earlier on? Did they not have the capability of doing the maths and checking the most optimal route of leveling up? And secondly, it's like, why is this taking so long? Basically, it took nearly 2 months for this to get resolved. And then the third thing is actually the reason I logged off last night and I haven't actually been back on the game since, because I was just feeling a little bit dejected about the whole thing. But it's actually a change in principle, again, I agree with, and that is a nerf to the elite chests. Now, I don't know if this is a bug, but it seems that the elite chests in like your level 65 areas are not dropping armor, but they are dropping weapons. That may or may not be a bug. It may be intentional. It's really hard to say, because the reason it's actually hard to say is that this was an unmarked patch change. Basically, this was not in the patch notes, and therefore we didn't really know anything about it. I would say, Amazon, please do not make changes without at least telling us about them. Not only are you not getting armor, which may or may not be a bug, we just don't know, it seems that they have buffed the mobs that are around the area so that you can't just like walk in there and kill them very easily and as a big group and just, you know, basically not pay any attention, just walk through it, take all the loot and get out of there. Which, to be fair, the chest runs were probably not really a fun mechanic. Just getting a big train of you and just blasting through everything and just taking easy rewards, probably not that good for the game, right? I don't think I would have fixed it this way. I think the way I would personally fixed it is giving loot to everybody who tagged a monster and then nerf the chests so that you actually get the rewards from killing rather than the chests. Whatever though, I'm not the game designer. I'm not that bothered about the change. What they're essentially doing with this change is making it more difficult to farm and increase your watermark gear score, because I'm presuming they thought it was too easy just doing these elite chest trains. I disagree with this partly because I don't think it was the right way to do it, but also because essentially it prolongs something that isn't very fun in the first place. Increasing your gear score and having to farm it over and over isn't really a fun mechanic, and now all you've done is made it harder. But again, it benefits the players who were level 60 earlier and were doing these chain runs quicker. Everybody else who still isn't level 600 in some of their gear score or comes way after is now going to have to go through more pain, whereas the people who didn't, who were there early, the hardcore players, basically have an advantage. And for these chest runs, well, it's the exact same two things. Why was this in the game in the first place, and why have you taken so long to fix it? That's the same for all three. And all three have basically given advantages to the people who got there first and did them. Anybody else who comes after that, which more likely going to be the casual players, are essentially at a disadvantage because they don't have access to the things that those players did. It was easier to get to 200. It was easier to get your watermark gear score up. It was easier to get your weapon mastery up. These things have now been taken away. You're making the game harder for casual players, and it's all because Amazon messed up the game. It's quite clear that they messed up the design of the game in some areas, otherwise they wouldn't fix them. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with some mistakes being made. You messed up, it's okay. But the game itself has shipped, and that ship has sailed. Correcting all of these issues in a way that basically gives the hardcore players who got there first the advantage and then disadvantages the rest of your player base is really probably not an optimal way of doing things. Essentially, I think it's unfair. But it's not unreasonable, it's just unfair. These fixes on an individual level I completely understand and mostly agree with. And really, they tried to change the whole game from being a hardcore PvP game to being a more casual PvX game, but they are consistently hurting the casual player base. For good reasons, but the outcomes are negative and bad. And honestly, I think it's going to bite Amazon in the backside. People are essentially going to stop playing if they haven't already. It's not just the problem that you're hurting the casual player base, which I do think is a big problem. It's also that doing so is going to highlight some of the problems that the game has, like the watermark gear score. I think that's not a fun system, and the more you make people play it, they're not going to enjoy it. Obviously, the correct time to have fixed all of these issues would have been before the game launched. And then you might be like, well, Jay, surely they better do it now rather than never. Well, yeah, a bit of me thinks actually that possibly isn't the right answer. I think they could have done this maybe in an expansion and planned to have an expansion maybe like 6 months to a year after the game, and then had it so that all of these issues were resolved and that every player was starting on equal footing, as opposed to having the hardcore players have an advantage and disadvantaging the casual. Because you know what? The hardcore players already have an advantage. They already play more. They already know more about the game. They're generally already better players. They don't need extra things. Now, if you come here with Amazon now and you be like, well, actually, we're going to make crafting easier by selling you little XP boosters, well, I think a lot of people are going to tell them that they're not happy with that. But let's hope that's not the case, and we'll see when that happens. I just think that we're seeing a bit of a pattern here where Amazon fixed things that shouldn't have been in the game in the first place, and the hardcore players have essentially already used it. I'm not going to say exploited, but they've already used it and got an advantage from that. And then your casual players and everybody who starts after that, even if you're a hardcore player who starts late, well, now you don't get the advantages of that, and now you're a little bit behind. And not only are you behind because you started late and you're not playing as much, you're behind because the game literally gave advantages to those hardcore players. It's bad design, it's a bad choice, and I wish they would correct it. The first thing they should do is make crafting a little bit easier rather than harder. I'm not saying how much harder it is, I'm not 100% sure how much it is, but it should actually have been a little bit easier rather than harder. And the second thing is to just make the chests drop like they used to, and maybe think of a different solution that actually isn't punishing in any way, shape or form. That's my thoughts on the issue. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like this video if you enjoyed me talking about it, maybe not necessarily the contents. Have a most beautiful day. Goodbye.